So we're discussing whether or not the President of America is right to force his opinions on whether or not we stay in the EU upon us. What do you think, Douglas Murray?
Hello? Sorry, I lost you for a moment there.
I'm just asking you whether you think the President of America is right to thrust his opinions on the referendum upon us.
Yes, I think so. I mean, he's the head of a very major ally and major allied country, and to that extent, he has the right to say whatever he thinks. It is, of course, obvious that it doesn't necessarily mean that he's right. I've known, as most people in journalism have, throughout my life and my career, people from both sides of the American political divide, Republicans and Democrats, and all of them pretty much are in favour of Britain remaining in the EU. But it's worth remembering why that is. It isn't for any other reason other than that, as I say again, from left and right in American politics, they recognise what a troubled entity the EU is, and they believe that their close ally Britain being in the EU is a very good thing because it helps moderate the EU in a broadly more transatlantic and indeed more pro-American direction. So it isn't as if it's a disinterested argument President Obama is making. He's making the case for Britain to remain in the EU to benefit America.
Sarah Churchwell, this is a partisan approach, and actually, what do you think about whether or not he should be making it? Why should he come to this country and dictate his views to us?
Well, I don't think he's dictating his views or thrusting them. I think he's sharing them. And I agree with Douglas that he has every right to do so. I mean, we all believe in free speech. So he's giving an opinion, and it's an informed opinion. As Douglas says, maybe it's not a disinterested opinion. On the other hand, nobody's opinion in this matter is disinterested. Everybody has, we all have interests and agendas here. And I think it's appropriate for the president to say that in the case of America, this is the view that is taken, and this is why. And I think there's a reason why Obama is as widely trusted around the world as he is, and it's because people think that he's rational and sane and intelligent and well-informed. And I know for myself as a voter that I always want to get as much information as I can. I find it useful in this instance to know that Vladimir Putin is in favor of Brexit, and I find it useful to know that Obama is against it. And I know in a debate between those two people which side I'd like to be on.
Douglas Murray, Ian Duncan Smith is saying that David Cameron went to Barack Obama on bended knee and begged him to stage this intervention. We don't know whether or not that really was the case. But even if it was, or something along those lines, that he very much is in favour of it, David Cameron, of hearing what President Obama has to say and encouraging him to tell the British public his views, is there a danger that perhaps this could backfire? Because perhaps the British people don't actually want to be dictated to, and they could feel that they're being patronised.
Well, first of all, if I could just quickly respond to something that Sarah said there. I mean, of course, just because one person wants you out or one person wants you in doesn't make that argument more or less valid. I mean, for instance, open borders of the kind the EU have had recently have enormously benefited ISIS. To that extent, the EU is terrific for ISIS. Would anyone seriously want the views of Mr. al-Baghdadi any more than Mr. Putin's as to whether or not we stay in? Of course not. Of course, the views of the American president are of interest. As I said, they are primarily for American reasons. But the point you just hit on is a very important one. And there's a very important point, if I may make it now, about this intervention. You see, it would be perfectly polite in these cases for instance, Mr. Cameron to go to America and to say that he doesn't think that the American Constitution is up to very much, and that there's no reason why America shouldn't enter a sort of union of the Americas in which it has completely open borders with Mexico, and in which it, for instance, it allows Cuba to disperse American taxpayer money, and Brazil to put laws that Americans have to live under.
Hang on,
of course, it would be a terrible idea for America and for the United States of America, and for many people in Britain, the EU is a terrible idea. The fact that Mr. Obama thinks it's good for us is neither here nor there to that extent, but of course he's very, very free to make the argument.
that is a completely false comparison. Obama's not coming over here and saying, hey, I've got an idea, let's create Brexit. Of course, if Cameron were to go over there and suggest a new agenda, it would be completely inappropriate. I personally do not, as an American voter, do not think it would be inappropriate, for example, for Cameron to go to Americans and say, hey, you know what, I don't think you should vote for Trump. I think that would be okay. I think for him to say, look, those of us in Europe think that that would be a mistake, because that is a live question that is being debated.
Well, the question of the American Constitution is a perennially live question. The question of the American Constitution is a perennially live question.
Well, there are lots of perennially live questions. It's not currently an electoral issue, and so it is not. So you're making things up in order to create absurd arguments. Obama is coming over and sharing an opinion about a very important debate that is happening right now, and we're both agreed that that is completely appropriate, and it doesn't mean that he is dictating what people are going to do. It means he's sharing an opinion.
And I haven't at any point said he is dictating it. I'm saying he's sharing an opinion, and it's a wrong opinion, because among other things, the things that the EU expects of the UK are things that no American could possibly tolerate for themselves. America would not tolerate a political arrangement in which Cuba dispersed taxes of American taxpayers. It would not tolerate open borders with Mexico. It would not tolerate Brazil dictating laws that Americans had to live under. Yet President Obama seems to think that an arrangement which has become increasingly unilateral from Brussels, and indeed from the European Commission, is something that British people should want to live under, and very many people don't.
Sarah Churchwell, it's an argument that Boris Johnson has made as well. He's accused the president of being, well, he hasn't said it, but he's accused him of being a hypocrite. But others are saying he's being disingenuous because the US would never join an institution like the EU. So how can he come over here and say, you Brits, you should stay in, when they would never do anything like it?
Well, actually, the United States is a federation of deeply divided states that we have a lot of trouble keeping together, as a matter of fact. And you might see that in the U.S. election system right now, this is what's getting debated. It is always getting debated. How do we balance individual local debates with larger ones, and the regional concerns with trying to create something that is larger and operates on the world stage? These are incredibly complicated questions, and everybody will need to make their own decision. I do not think that Obama is wrong to share his opinion. His opinion is an informed one. But the word that he is dictating has been used several times in this conversation.
Not by me.
I didn't say you did say it, but it is being put forward. And what I am saying is that he's not dictating. He's sharing an opinion, and people are free to agree or disagree with it.
Okay, let me just tell our viewers, because we were just looking at pictures of President Obama just leaving Riyadh on a trip there to Saudi Arabia, just boarding Air Force One, actually on his way here to London. So very much a live debate. He's going to be here in a few hours. Douglas Murray, let me ask you this, though. Will his opinion actually make any difference to the debate? Do you think it could sway voters here? Do we hold President Obama in such high regard that it will change anybody's opinion, what he has to say?
I'm not sure it'll change anyone's opinion, particularly on its own, although I think a cumulative effect of the government in Westminster persuading, major allies and others to tell people, if you step out of the EU, it's going to be a catastrophe, will have some impact. I think it's worth remembering that our main alliances, and particularly our security alliances that we're in with America, NATO, the Five Eyes intelligence sharing and other things, don't have any connection to the EU. And so to that extent, if he tries to take part in sort of Project Fear, as it's being called, then I think that would be a great mistake. But just to reiterate this point, the idea that Sarah argues that the United States of America is anything like the EU is purest claptrap. If the United States of America, as we all know, has many problems, but if power and democracy in America was so bad that it had a European Commission-like problem in which a tiny group of people coalesced more and more power towards themselves and had less and less interest in the opinions of people across the Union, then I can assure Sarah that her country of birth would have fallen apart a very long time ago. The EU is an unsustainable project. The United States of America is a wonderful project.
Okay, we get the point you're making. I just want to ask Sarah another point here. If we do vote to leave the EU in this country, will it damage the special relationship we have with the United States, do you think?
Well, I think it clearly will. I mean, I think it's going to create. It's clearly going to create problems with the trade agreements that America is trying to, to foster across the Atlantic. It is obviously going to create various kinds of, I mean, everything's going to have to get rethought. And look, and to go back to Douglas's point, the kind of false binaries here, that to say that if somebody thinks that on all of the weighing all of the evidence that we're better off in, that's not to say that the European Union doesn't have problems that need to be addressed. It's not to say that it doesn't need to be fixed. I think we're all agreed that there are ways in which it needs to be fixed. The question is whether the radical Brexit solution is the correct response to the fact that the EU needs to be fixed. And again, I think that's for everybody to decide for themselves.
Sure.
But yes, it will affect Britain's relationship with America. Of course it will.
It'll make Britain, among other things, a much better ally for America. It will mean, among other things, we're a much better trading partner.
Okay, Douglas Murray, Sarah Churchwell, thank you very much for your passionate views there. Fascinating to hear you both. Thank you.